The rain was relentless, drumming a cold, rhythmic tattoo against the grimy windows of the precinct and turning the streets outside into slick mirrors of fractured neon. Elias Kade stood at the edge of the alley, trench coat clinging to his tall frame, breath shallow and fogging in the chill night air. His eyes, sharp and restless, scanned the darkness for the faintest flicker of movement, a shadow unbound from flesh, a wraith among the forgotten. Somewhere ahead it flickered, a jagged distortion against the concrete and steel, a rogue shadow, untethered and dangerous.
There!
Elias hissed, voice barely audible over the steady rain. He took off down the alley, boots splashing through puddles reflecting the fractured city lights in shards of blue and crimson. The shadow twisted and darted ahead with a fluid, unnatural grace, slipping past obstacles with a flicker of smoky tendrils. It was both everywhere and nowhere, a living absence that taunted the hunter with its spectral dance. Behind him, the muffled shouts of his team and the faint clicks of communication devices were swallowed by the storm. Elias's heart hammered, a wild drumbeat syncing with the relentless rain. Every step brought him closer to the impossible, capturing a thing that was both part of and apart from this world. The chase led through labyrinthine alleys, narrow corridors where the city's neon veins pulsed weakly through the fog. The shadow twisted into a narrow passageway, and Elias lunged, fingers closing on nothing but wet air. The creature slipped past, its form briefly solidifying into a dark silhouette etched with cryptic, shifting patterns, symbols that seemed almost alive. Suddenly the shadow halted, pulsing with a strange, low vibration. Elias froze, senses sharpening. Then, as if responding to an unspoken command, the shadow emitted a sequence of flickering shapes, a staccato rhythm of light and dark that defied immediate comprehension. "What the hell?" Elias whispered, eyes wide. The shadow's communication was unlike anything he had imagined, a language woven from darkness itself. The moment stretched taut before a sudden flare of static from behind startled him. His partner, Mira Voss, appeared at the alley's mouth, rain plastering her cropped hair to her forehead.
Elias!
"We've got backup. You were pushing too far alone," she called out, voice sharp but tinged with concern. He shook his head, eyes never leaving the shifting silhouette. "It's not just a mindless parasite, Mira. It's trying to tell us something." They managed to corner the shadow in a dilapidated warehouse, beams of floodlights slicing through the darkness. Elias moved with practiced precision, activating containment devices designed to trap these elusive entities. The shadow writhed, its cryptic symbols glowing brighter, pulsing with an eerie rhythm that filled the space with a palpable tension. Once secured, Elias retreated to a safe house, a dim, cramped room cluttered with screens and scattered data pads. The rain hammered the windows as he obsessively replayed hours of footage, eyes bloodshot and face drawn. Patterns emerged from the chaos, repeated gestures, flickering codes embedded within the shadow's movements, whispers of a language hidden in darkness. Days blurred into nights. Elias's world contracted to this single obsession. Mira tried reaching out, but each attempt was met with silence or curt dismissal. His isolation deepened, paranoia creeping into his thoughts like a poison. The shadows outside were no longer just threats. They became mirrors reflecting his own fractured psyche. One evening, Mira cornered him in the precinct's narrow corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her piercing gaze locked on his haunted eyes. "Elias, you can't do this alone. You were losing yourself. We were partners, you have to trust me." He looked away, jaw clenched. "Trust? After everything? How can I when my own shadow is turning against me?" Her voice softened. "Then let me help you carry the weight. We're in this together." Reluctantly, Elias nodded, the first flicker of connection in days. Back at the containment unit, the rogue shadow shifted restlessly, cryptic symbols glowing within its silhouette like a pulse of dark light. Elias leaned close, listening to the subtle vibrations that seemed almost like whispered secrets twisting in the air. The revelations promised answers, but also deeper mysteries, questions about identity, control, and the thin line separating man from shadow. As the city outside roared with neon and rain, Elias realized the hunt was far from over. The shadows were no longer just enemies, they were enigmas, and the truth they held threatened to shatter everything he thought he knew. The fragile boundary between self and other was dissolving, and with it, Elias's grip on reality. The stale air of the laboratory hung heavy with the scent of ozone and mechanical grease, punctuated by the low hum of machines struggling to pierce the city's enveloping gloom. Flickering monitors cast intermittent pale blues and greens across the cluttered room, illuminating faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Elias Kade stood rigid, his trench coat a dark silhouette against the pale light, eyes narrowed as Draz Leonard Huxley adjusted the strange device perched atop a metal table. This, Huxley began, voice rough yet fervent, is the latest in shadow tracking technology. It uses a combination of photonic resonance and quantum fluctuation mapping to detect and predict shadow movements beyond normal sensory perception. Elias' gaze never wavered. And you expect me to believe this isn't another Umbra ploy? Huxley's disheveled hair shook with a dry chuckle. Believe what you will, detective, but the city is drowning in shadows, and without new tools we were fighting blind. Mira Voss, standing off to the side, crossed her arms, her piercing gaze flickering between Elias and Huxley. The laboratory's glow highlighted the sharp lines of her face, the intensity of her pragmatic mind wrestling with the moral quagmire before her. Outside, the city's rain-slicked streets whispered memories of a life she once lived, a life fueled by rebellion and idealism. The cold night air seemed to seep through the cracked window panes, carrying with it distant echoes of chants and shattered glass from her days as a cyber activist. Those were days when the law was an adversary, not a shield. I don't know if I'm ready to wear that badge again, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying everything I stood for. Elias glanced at her, the weight of his own battles shadowing his features. We were all broken in this city, Mira. The question is whether we let that break us or make us stronger. Back in his cramped apartment, Elias sat hunched over a table, the dim light from a single bulb flickering weakly above. His eyes were fixed on the peeling wallpaper where his shadow danced, twitching unnaturally, as if struggling to free itself from the confines of his body. The silence pressed down on him like a physical force, his breath shallow and rapid. He reached out hesitantly, fingers trembling, as if trying to grasp something intangible. The shadow recoiled, then writhed, mocking him in silence. A cold sweat broke across his brow. Not again, he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of fear and paranoia. The next day, the sterile cold of the police interrogation room was pierced only by the incessant buzz of fluorescent lights. Elias confronted Huxley directly, his voice low and edged with accusation. You retangled up with Umbra. How deep does this go? Huxley's eyes flickered with a flash of something unreadable. Umbra's reach is long, detective, but I'm not their pawn. My allegiance is to the science, to the truth behind these shadows. But truth in this city was a slippery thing, distorted by power and corruption. Elias's mind raced, the boundaries between ally and enemy blurring as the shadows lengthened around him. Meanwhile, Mira's internal conflict simmered beneath her calm exterior. Each hack into Umbra's encrypted networks revealed fractures within the call, but also painful reminders of her activist past, the ideals she once fought for, now entangled with the grim realities of law enforcement. Trust was a rare commodity, and loyalty often a dangerous gamble. As the investigation deepened, Elias's grip on reality frayed further. Shadows no longer conformed to the natural laws. They moved with a will that chilled the marrow. His own shadow's erratic behavior mirrored his unraveling psyche, a dark reflection of the chaos consuming the city. The chapter closed with Elias staring into the fragmented reflections cast by rain-slicked windows, the city's neon lights bleeding into the darkness. Questions gnawed at him. Could he wield Huxley's technology without falling into the Umbra trap? Was Mira's loyalty steadfast, or was the past destined to undo them both? And most haunting of all, was he still himself, or was the shadow already claiming him? The answer lay hidden in the shifting darkness, where light and shadow danced their eternal, treacherous waltz. The city was drowning in chaos. Neon lights flickered erratically, casting fractured patterns across rain-slicked streets. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed sharp, insistent, a cry for order amidst the growing disorder. But order was slipping through the cracks like water through a broken dam. Shadows detached, autonomous, and malevolent prowled the alleys and thoroughfares, striking with impunity. Tonight, the detachment phenomenon had reached a new, terrifying peak. Elias Kade's trench coat flapped against the biting wind as he hurried through the narrow streets of Sector 7. The rain drenched him, soaked through his worn fabric and chilled his bones. Yet he barely noticed. His gaze was fixed on the flickering holo map projected from his wrist, tracing the path of recent shadow attacks. Each red dot represented another victim, another fragment of chaos unleashed upon the city. Another one just came through. A voice crackled in his ear. Mira's voice, steady but tense. Shadow attack near the old market. Multiple casualties. Elias cursed under his breath. On my way. The market was a cramped labyrinth of stalls and narrow passageways, now transformed into a scene of carnage. Flickering neon signs sputtered above shattered glass and overturned carts. The air was thick with the metallic stench of blood and the acrid smoke of burning synth fabric. Elias's footsteps echoed as he reached the epicenter, a cluster of terrified survivors huddled beneath a flickering street lamp. Their shadows fluttered unnaturally, disconnected and twisting like living smoke. They came out of nowhere. A trembling man stuttered. The shadows. They attacked without bodies. Elias felt the familiar chill of dread creep up his spine. Stay calm. We'll contain this. But calm was a fragile veneer. Suddenly, a distorted shape materialized from the darkness, the detached shadow of a victim, its form a writhing, formless mass that twisted and pulsed with unnatural energy. It lunged with terrifying speed, a black smear against the neon-lit backdrop. Elias barely dodged, the shadow's tendrils grazing his arm, leaving a cold, burning sensation. He drew his pulse pistol, firing a burst of energy that shimmered in the damp air. The shadow recoiled but did not dissipate. Its evolving, Elias muttered, eyes narrowing, they relearning. Behind him, the crowd scattered in panic as the shadow reformed, shifting shape and preparing to strike again. Elias steadied his breathing and fired once more, this time a precise shot that shattered the shadow into writhing fragments before they dissolved into the rain. Too close, he said, wiping sweat and rain from his brow. A hand touched his shoulder. Mira appeared from the shadows, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. Umbro's pushing harder, she said grimly. I've been tracking their communications. They were exploiting every crack in the city's psychosocial unrest, fear, grief to amplify shadow detachments. It's not random chaos, it's orchestrated. Elias's jaw clenched. So the city's unraveling isn't just collateral damage, it's the plan. Mira nodded, and it's working. The more people lose control, the more their shadows slip free. They moved quickly, the weight of the city's unraveling pressing down on them with suffocating intensity. Mira pulled up encrypted data streams on her portable interface, fingers flying over holographic keys as she decrypted Umbro's coded messages. Listen to this, she whispered. Phase 3 initiation, escalate emotional triggers, deploy agents to foment unrest. They're reusing fear and chaos like weapons, turning the city's own psyche against itself. Elias stared out over the rooftops, the sprawling megacity, a maze of flickering lights and shadowed alleys, the neon glow casting long, distorted silhouettes. His own shadow at his feet twitched unnaturally, flickering between allegiance and rebellion, a dark reflection of his fractured mind. We're running out of time, Elias said, voice low. If Umbra controls the shadows and the people's emotions, what hope is left? Mira's eyes met his, fierce and resolute. Hope is what we make of it. We fight back. But as they delved deeper into Umbra's web, the city's darkness grew heavier, the shadows more unpredictable. A violent encounter with a rogue shadow left Elias physically wounded and mentally shaken, the cold touch of betrayal lingering like a stain. And above all, the question gnawed at him. How much of himself could he reclaim before he was lost completely to the darkness? The night closed in, and the city held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game where shadows and souls alike were at stake. The rain was relentless, drumming a chaotic rhythm against the neon-lit streets of the city, washing the grime of a million forgotten lives into the gutters. Elias Kade moved through the fog-shrouded alleyways, trench coat collar turned up against the chill, his eyes sharp beneath tired lids. The city's pulse was a dissonant symphony of flickering holo ads and distant sirens, but beneath it all, a new terror thrummed the rogue shadows. His own shadow stretched before him, warped and twitching with a life of its own. It lagged just a fraction behind him, but the twitching was no longer a mere trick of light. It was deliberate, a stutter of movement that didn't match the rhythm of his steps. Elias stopped abruptly, heart hammering in his chest, eyes narrowing as he watched the darkness flicker unnaturally. "Not again," he muttered, voice barely audible over the rain. He'd felt it before, that creeping disquiet when his shadow hesitated, twitched, or moved differently. But tonight it was worse. It was watching him, waiting, calculating. The city's shadows had become predators, and now his own shadow was turning on him. Elias's thoughts scrambled as he rounded a corner into a narrow alley, slick with rain and illuminated only by the flickering glow of a failing neon sign. He moved cautiously, every sense heightened. Then, without warning, the shadow lunged. It detached in a fluid, unnatural way, stretching impossibly long before snapping forward with a speed that defied logic. Elias barely had time to react as cold darkness surged forward, wrapping around his limbs like living smoke. His breath hitched as the shadow constricted, a crushing pressure that threatened to suffocate not just his body but his very will. Pain blossomed in his chest, sharp and consuming, as the shadow's malevolent presence pressed into him. He struggled, fists pounding the oily blackness, but it was relentless, an echo of himself turned predator. "No," he gasped, desperation igniting a fire in his eyes. Suddenly, the shadow recoiled like a struck beast, slipping away into the fog as quickly as it had attacked. Elias collapsed against the damp brick wall, gasping for air, sweat mingling with rain on his brow. His heart thundered with a terror deeper than physical pain, the realization that the hunter had become the hunted. "Elias!" Mira's voice cut through the haze, sharp and urgent. She appeared at the alley's mouth, rain-soaked and determined, her piercing gaze locking onto him. "Are you all right?" He shook his head slowly, trying to steady his trembling hands. "It was my shadow. It attacked me." Mira's eyes widened, a mixture of fear and disbelief flashing across her face. "We need to get you out of here. Now." They moved swiftly, navigating the labyrinthine streets to her apartment, a sanctuary of flickering screens and humming servers. Mira's fingers flew over the keyboard as Elias slumped into a chair, exhaustion and dread weighing down his limbs. "There's something different about your shadow," Mira murmured, eyes scanning the data streaming across her monitors. "It's not just rogue, it's aware." Elias clenched his jaw, the weight of that word heavy on his tongue. Awareness meant intent, malice, betrayal. "How do you fight something that's part of you?" he whispered. Mira didn't have an answer. Instead, she pulled up encrypted Umbra communications, her fingers hesitating as she uncovered threads of sabotage and manipulation woven through the city's darkest corners. Agent Klein's shadowy presence loomed in every data set, a ghost in the machine, undermining their efforts. The room seemed to close in around Elias as he grappled with the impossible truth. His shadow, his very self, had turned against him. The line between identity and otherness blurred into a suffocating fog. Night deepened outside, the city's neon glow casting fractured reflections on rain-slicked streets. Elias stared at the cracked pavement, eyes fixed on the familiar silhouette flickering at his feet. It wavered, then slipped away, dissolving into the mist like a lost fragment of his soul. I'm no longer the hunter, he said quietly, voice edged with despair. I'm the hunted. Mira reached out, her hand steadying his trembling one. Then we find a new way, together. But as the shadows lengthened and the city whispered its secrets, Elias knew the path ahead was darker than ever, a descent into the unknown where every step might be his last. The hunter was hunted now, and the game had only just begun. The rain hammered on the cracked pavement as Elias moved with measured steps through the city's labyrinth. His mind replayed the attack, the cold grip of his shadow's betrayal etched into his memory. Every flicker at the periphery of his vision set his nerves alight. He stopped beneath the flickering neon sign of a rundown diner, the hum of faded advertisements mixing with distant sirens and the steady patter of rain. His shadow stretched before him, twitching and flickering without his command. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, voice raw. No answer came, only the silent, mocking dance of darkness. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and stale tobacco. Mira sat in a corner booth, eyes fixed on a wall of screens that mapped shadow activity across the city. Her face was drawn, but resolute. "We were running out of time," she said without looking up. "Umbra's plans are accelerating." Elias slid into the seat opposite her, exhaustion weighing heavy on his frame. "My shadow attacked me. Almost killed me." Mira finally met his gaze, the sharpness in her eyes softened by concern. "Then we re-in deeper than we thought." The city outside seemed to hold its breath, a restless giant watching its own unraveling. Elias felt the walls closing in, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down. "I don't know if I can trust myself anymore," he confessed. Mira reached across the table, her hand steady on his. "You re not alone." But even as her words offered a fragile lifeline, Elias knew the shadow lurking within was a darkness not easily tamed. The hunter was hunted, and survival meant confronting the very essence of his fractured self. Later, in the cramped confines of the precinct, Elias sat slumped at his desk, the dull glow of his terminal illuminating lines of data and surveillance footage. Agent Klein's interference was evident, encrypted files deleted, shadow tracking devices sabotaged. Captain Rorke's voice echoed in his mind, a reminder of the pressure mounting from above. "Results, Kade. We need results." But how could he produce results when the enemy was a part of him? Mira entered quietly, a data chip in hand. "I think I found something," she said, voice low. A pattern in the shadows, detachment spikes around moments of emotional turmoil. Elias rubbed his face, exhaustion deepening the lines etched by sleepless nights. "So the shadows feed on chaos." She nodded. "And your shadow, it's feeding on you." The truth settled like a stone in his gut. His own mind was battleground, his identity fractured, his shadow a rogue agent. The city's darkness was not just around him but within. The hunt had shifted. Elias was no longer the predator, he was prey, and the shadows were closing in. The city outside Elias Kade's apartment window throbbed with restless neon light, a kaleidoscope of fractured colors bleeding through the grime-smeared glass. The rain fell steadily, drumming a relentless rhythm that echoed the turmoil inside his mind. He sat motionless in the darkened room, the worn trench coat draped over the back of a cracked leather chair, shadows flickering across his angular features like restless phantoms. His eyes, sunken and shadowed, tracked the erratic pulse of the city below, a sprawling mass of steel and suffering, where shadows, detached from their owners, prowled like predators, reminders of his own betrayal. Since the ambush, since his shadow had turned against him, Elias had become a ghost in his own life. The camaraderie that had once anchored him to the investigation, and to Mira Voss now seemed like a distant memory. He recoiled from their concern, mistrust gnawing at the edges of his sanity. The betrayal was not just external. It was woven into the very fabric of his being, a fracture that threatened to splinter him beyond repair. Mira's knock was tentative at first, barely audible over the storm's crescendo. When he didn't respond, she tried again, firmer this time. "Elias, please." Her voice was low, edged with worry. "We need to talk." He didn't move. The silence was a wall between them, thick and impenetrable. She stepped inside, the scent of rain and ozone clinging to her pragmatic attire. Her piercing gaze searched his face, reading the exhaustion and despair etched there. "You can't do this alone," she said softly, crossing the room to sit opposite him. But Elias only shook his head, bitterness curling his lips. "You don't understand," he muttered. "It's not just the shadows out there. One's inside me now." Mira reached out, hesitating before placing a hand on his arm. "We're still fighting this together. You don't have to carry it all." The words hung fragile in the charged air, but Elias pulled back, retreating further into his isolation. Each attempt to reach him seemed to dissolve like mist, swallowed by his growing paranoia. Meanwhile, far from the flickering lights and rain-streaked windows, Agent Klein's presence festered like a shadow within the police precinct. In a dimly lit backroom, fractured holographic displays flickered, casting ghostly light on his obscured figure. His voice was a cold whisper, issuing orders through encrypted channels. Every sabotage, every misstep inflicted upon Elias's team was a calculated move in Umbra Network's broader game, a game of control, corruption, and chaos. Captain Rourke's gruff voice cut through the tension during a rare confrontation in the precinct's cramped office. "Kade, you re-slipping," he said, eyes narrowing beneath heavy brows. "We need results, not ghosts. The city's unraveling, and you read the last line." Elias met the glare, exhaustion and defiance warring in his gaze. "I'm doing what I can," he replied, voice low but firm. "This isn't just about shadows. It's about what's inside them and inside us." Outside, the city's sirens wailed in a chorus of desperation. The shadows moved with increasing violence, and the fragile order that once held was fracturing beyond repair. Elias's inner battle mirrored the chaos unleashed in the streets, a man haunted by loss, betrayed by his own shadow, struggling to hold onto the fragments of his identity. As the night deepened, Elias found himself at a crossroads, the weight of isolation pressing down like a suffocating shroud. Could he break through the frayed edges of his mind and trust again? Or would the shadows consume him entirely, leaving behind only a hollow shell lost to the creeping darkness? The answers lay buried in the city's neon veins, in the tangled web of corruption and control that Umbra wove with cruel precision. And time was running out.